meeting is being recorded.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's SIG Network meeting. Just a reminder that this meeting is under the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which basically boils down to be nice to one another. This will be my first time hosting the meeting, so I figured I would introduce myself. I think I know most of you and have met many of you in person. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Shane Utt. I work on Kubernetes networking at Kong. I'm probably best known in the community for working as a maintainer on Gateway API, along with Rob Scott and Nick Young. Mike Zappa and I responded to the call for chairs for volunteers. So this will be my first time hosting today. All right, we don't seem to have a ton on the agenda, so if you have anything while we're starting on the agenda, please feel free to add it. If we can't get to it today, we can get to it at the next meeting. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Make it a little bigger. All right. First things first, let's go over triage. We got 4 issues in triage today, starting with allow type load balancer for headless service for specialized proxiers, which I took a look at.
Lars, do you want to give us a bootstrap on this question? Is Lars here?
I see Lars.
If you're here,
Hello,
we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Ah, great. Yeah, it's kind of a rebirth of an old question that came up in the all ports KEP work.
Okay.
And for specialized proxiers, for me at least, a common use case is to only care about external traffic. And the cluster IP then is basically unusable or even bad to use. So I would like to have a possibility to have the combination of a load balancer type and cluster IP none, only for specialized proxiers.
Is it that cluster IP is not useful, or is it that cluster IP is actually harmful for some reason?
Basically, it's not useful. It really doesn't matter in most cases if it is there. It's just that it looks strange when users check. They think they have a cluster IP, but actually they haven't.
Yeah, that was my read of this too, is that the main thing is that it was confusing for users.
Yeah.
What I don't understand when I asked on the issue is like a concrete use case for this. Like I'm trying to visualize the use case where you're trying to route traffic without a target IP.
I have added 3 use cases where only it's only external traffic that is useful for those 3 use cases. The cluster IP, of course, you might want to implement it, but it's just a lot of extra work for no good reason.
Lars, one question. What do you want from the services? The endpoints? Do you need the backends only?
Sorry.
The question...
So that's implementation. That doesn't matter. I plan to implement with the campaign, but it could be just anything basically.
No. My question is, you need this service to forward traffic to something. What is this something? What are the backends of these services?
That would be in the simple case, the all IP. It would be like pod addresses. I believe we have already discussed this in the all IP KEP. But for the other, there is more complicated. For the extra network, the network separation thing, then you must have addresses, of course, on the other network. Then we must implement also endpoint slices, or add them ourselves in some way. And so I'm looking forward to this library with endpoint slices.
My question is, because do you really need a service for doing this, or do you need something else?
No, I need a
Because-
service.
But if you are
The
not
application.
going to use,
Sorry.
yeah, because you are not going to use the cluster IP. What do you need from the service?
The load balancer IP. It's external traffic entering the cluster through the load balancer IP.
Okay.
And it's
Okay.
supposed to be load balanced to servers inside the cluster. But this service will never be used for cluster internal traffic.
So I think what you
Okay.
really want is a gateway. Like this is kind of what gateway is aiming for. Rob, stop me if I oversell it, or anybody else who's working on gateway. But I feel like this service was designed for, you know, a small set of things in a very opinionated and sometimes not helpful way, which I think is what you're struggling with in the sort of concentric or stacked model. Gateway should allow you to say, here's my service. It does not have a cluster IP, and my gateway now targets this service. And my gateway can be of any class I want it to be.
Not to go ahead if you want, Rob. I can.
No, I mean, I will at least say that I would love to see more of these kind of use cases come to Gateway. I will admit that our L4 is not widely implemented today, to say the least, but we are working to change that. That is a high priority.
We're picking up steam there.
Yes, and we definitely have left room in the API to enable all ports. It is not present there, but we have described how that would work. I would love to at least think about how this works with Gateway. But Shane, you can probably follow up.
I was just going to say, it's not a no to your question, Tim, but it's suffice to say most gateway implementations today, or in cluster gateway implementations today, actually just use service type load balancer. So there's some work to be done, certainly. But if I'm reading the room right, it sounds like the general sentiment here is there is, for the purpose of something that kind of boils down to a little bit of confusion for a user for a special use case, there is not very much appetite for making the change in tree, but there may be some in gateway. And I agree that gateway might be a good place for this.
But from a historical context, if we had things like CRDs at the beginning, gateway is what I would have wanted service to look like. But we didn't have a way to express this sort of constellation of smaller resources. And so service became this all-encompassing thing, which we're now, you know, having to suffer with. I would love it if in the limit, nobody used service type other than cluster IP, and everything else, maybe not even cluster IP, like maybe we have a different type, but all service load balancers and node ports and everything else was defined as gateways. They can be implemented in the same proxies, but they're defined through the gateway API.
Indeed. And we have our North Star issue that's been guiding us of eventually wanting to get to the point where we can do load balancer provisioning similar, like have our own way of doing that without having to piggyback on service. So that's always kind of on the horizon.
So Lars, I admit I haven't fully read the issue. I just loaded it up this morning. I'll read it and I'll throw my thoughts there, but are you satisfied with that direction, or are you sort of vehemently disagreeing?
Nah, I can live without this feature. So it's mostly a cosmetic thing. So if there is a cluster IP that cannot be used, doesn't really matter. It just looked bad.
Does it make sense to you to actually implement Gateway though? As like, I mean, maybe not just for this purpose, but in general for the project you're kind of alluding to here.
I believe I have misunderstood the gateway. I thought it was more of a replacement for the ingress thing. But if you can implement an old load balancer that actually load balance external traffic to various pods through another network than the Kubernetes network, then certainly I should check it out. But if it's too long in the future, or that might not be what I want, but I can start with these.
Lars, I think the truth is the things that get implemented are because people are there saying, I need this. So if you show up with real use cases and say, hey, this would help me, but it needs to focus on the L4 side of the gateway API, then you could be the catalyst for making that happen.
Okay, I put some effort into present these 3 use cases, and I believe they can be reused.
Cool. I'll follow up on the issue too.
All right. The next one that we have for today, thank you, Lars, is some requests sent to node port are not responding. I didn't read this one yet. I built a Kubernetes cluster.
I scanned it over. I didn't see anything like obvious that the user was doing wrong. It wasn't clear. I didn't go through all the details with a fine comb. It wasn't clear whether there's something bad going on the machine. There's a lot of logs from containerd and kubelet for eviction. That's the only suspicious piece.
Okay. So this really just needs more digging in, and it seems like there's a continuing thread on that.
There is, but Paco is not a regular SIGNet person, I think.
But he's good at these things, and I agree with him. I think that this is a support problem.
Okay. Well, I'd be happy to take this one, assign it to myself, and work with Paco to kind of see it to the end.
Great. And as a reminder, procedurally, when we're doing triage, we're usually asking for somebody to volunteer to confirm an issue. So Shane, you can go further than that, or you can get to the point where you're like, yep, this is a real bug, and then triage accept it, and then now we can figure out who's going to work on it, or you can continue to work on it.
Roger that. Next, GCE master scale correctness from Grace.
I didn't close this.
You meant to close this, Antonio?
No, I asked them to keep it open. There was some failures, and usually I tell them until you don't have 7 of 7 or 10 of 10 greens, keep it open. So okay.
So should we just should we just triage accept this one?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'll do that after.
This.
Go ahead.
This has been a long running. Yeah, this has been a long running issue. The current state is that it was closed, follow up and kept. The author of the issue did not want it to be closed and reopened, and it is stuck in a. I think the author would prefer to leave this issue open until the feature request was implemented. Not, I don't know procedurally what the thing to do here is.
Okay, yeah, so there's no actions to take.
No, we don't have a like procedure that we have dictated for defining a feature request, and then there's a KEP open for it. Should we keep the feature request open, or should we close the feature request in favor of the KEP, which is sort of what we usually do, except in this case, the KEP wasn't exactly what he was thinking about. It didn't seem to address the problem that he wanted. We're now having the discussion on the KEP. I don't mind leaving the feature open, like leaving the issue open, because it has some details in it. But I didn't want to triage it because I'm afraid we'll just lose track of it. And so I like to revisit it every couple of weeks as we're discussing. But if we were to implement this new, there's a proposal through dev contributor experience to re-triage issues. Basically, if an issue has been untouched for a certain amount of time, the proposal would be to mark it needs triage and force SIGs to go back through and reevaluate old issues. Then triage would get a lot more exciting around here. And B, we would at least not lose track of this. So I'm fine to leave it open for now.
Sounds like you'll continue to shepherd it, Rob, as we.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. For now, that's it's on me. There are two. That's actually the one thing I added to the agenda, which might be not quite next, but yes, we'll talk about it more shortly. So.
Okay. Moving on to backlog grooming, a special backlog grooming. Tim, you requested that we all bring something.
I did say that. Does anybody want to start?
Bridget?
Sure. So I did kind of what you asked for and also something a little bit broader. I noticed that we have a great deal of very old issues. We're talking like 5 years old and more that are labeled frozen. And so that might be low hanging fruit to like hit some of the really old ones and be like, oh, we already took care of that. Or, oh, we're definitely not doing that. But I picked one specific one that it kind of looks like a couple of SIGs, including us, we're looking at. And yeah, I don't know if you want to click on that specific one.
Sure.
But it was interesting because I wonder if the last thing was Elena Hashman saying, what if we either didn't do this or pushed it to CNI? And I thought, this sounds like low-hanging fruit. Do we actually want SIG Network to add a scheduling resource? And it looks like Antonio and Tim had already waited on this years ago.
Yeah, the thing is that the network is not something that you can, I mean, it's statistically multiplexed, so you don't have X bandwidth, or, I mean, when you send traffic, you take the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that you can share one part, it's fake. When you share the bandwidth, it's fake. It's just used a lot of different time slots to send different traffic.
But so the reason I've been reluctant to close this is because I've definitely talked to customers for whom access to a certain amount of bandwidth is a requirement for their applications. And so, they how to express that has always been the question. I agree with Antonio in that I wouldn't want to schedule network bandwidth like we do cores, right? You have access to 1 gigabit per second, and that means there's only 9 gigabits per second left for anybody else, right? I don't think we'd want to do that. I do think it's interesting to question whether this machine is a 1 gig machine versus this machine is a 10 gig machine is something that users would like to express in their pod. I request a 10 gig machine. They can do it through things like node selectors today, but that's really sort of distant from what they're trying to express. And so historically I've left this open because I don't know what the right answer is, and I don't have enough signal from our own customers as to what exactly they would want, because it doesn't seem to be anybody's highest priority. Interestingly, good choice on this one, Bridget. Interestingly, there's a KEP right now coming out of Intel that's talking about quality of service bands for various resources, and network is obviously could fit into that. And the proposal is for a pod to be able to say, this, first of all, for the node to say, I have these network bands, like top, gold, silver, bronze, and for a pod to request which band it would fall into, which would give it priority access to the bandwidth, but not necessarily a guarantee of bandwidth. And that proposal would seem to fit well with network. I don't know if that alone satisfies this demand.
Go ahead, Bear. Bear, you had your hand up. You are muted.
Pear, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm talking on muted. No, I said I agree with what you said, and I was going to say something similar because we should never put numbers. I mean, we have 400 gig interfaces now. I mean, 110, 40, 100, 200, 400. We're going to get the terabit interfaces. So it doesn't make sense. But gold, silver, bronze, then you can do that mapping for each system.
So it sounds like the action to take is potentially ask them if it's okay to close this because as a won't do, like kind of check their temperature on that. Is anybody ready to kind of do that and provide the explanation?
I think they are conflating a bunch of, and I think we do, conflating a bunch of things together: congestion, avoidance, and all of that. That's having a bandwidth doesn't mean that you will have no congestion. Meaning the only way, like we cannot say X% as Antonio, I think, outlined it. What you can say is max off. It's like max off, I don't know, 100 megs per second, 200 megs per second. And even if you do that, you cannot say, oh, because I have 1 gig and I said that this one is 200 megs, then I have 800 megs for everything else. The truth is, Kubernetes, when it runs, it doesn't know about everything in the node, right? Take an example of apt update, the apt upgrade happening during some intensive network activity. That takes some network. So even though we say that 800 megs are for you, you can't get them because something we don't know about is running. I think this is more about the status of the network, like the way the issue is expressed is they want to place a pod somewhere where the network is not congested and move it if the network is congested. That's as far as I can tell from the reading. I think we need to sit down and just agree on defining what we're trying, what this, like, it makes sense. A lot of people don't care about, oh, reserve this resource or reserve gold or reserve bronze. They just want to make sure that this pod will always take priority in terms of networking and runs in a space where it can consume as much network as it can. So that's at least what I think most customers are asking for.
I think that's what we assert that most customers are asking for because we're close enough to understand. But I've definitely heard people say, I want to know that I'm guaranteed at least 1 gigabit per second. I can deal with more, but I can't deal with less.
Can't we push this to the multi-networking? I mean, because then we have, then we need to have many networks anyway, and then you probably want to have some way to express quality of service there as well. So hand it over to Machi and us that's working on that.
That's an interesting question.
That works only in a model where you have hardware. I think, like most clouds will give you bandwidths per VM. It doesn't matter how many NICs you have. So, you have a VM of some SKU, and then you have a max transmission rate for this VM. It doesn't matter if you want to split them on 6 NICs, 1 NIC, it doesn't matter. So what the model you're talking about is where we have 2 networks truly connected to different switch, where every NIC has 100% of the capacity. So the app can use the NIC that has 10 gig, and that's how you can reserve 10 gig by just making sure that no other app on the same network, on the same node is using that NIC. Again, it's the thing about, we don't know what other things are running on the same node at the same time.
No, but if you have many networks, sort of, you might ask for different, because you might use it for different things. If I have a network that's used for database access, I might want to have a specific service type on that network, right?
Like multi-bronx stuff, front end, back end networking stuff,
For the sake of time, let's move ahead. I'm going to keep this open. I'm going to try to capture a couple of notes. I wasn't typing while we were talking, so I'll try my best to capture the notes. My inclination is to close this. So we don't have a good protocol here. Like, please weigh in. I like the idea. I think there is a problem here. It's not acute enough that anybody's working on it. If somebody were to show up with a KEP and real use cases and want to work on this, I wouldn't say no to it, but I don't think it's anything that anybody's going to work on anytime soon. And I don't know that keeping this 5-year-old bug open helps very much.
My inclination is to close it with a comment that says, like, explains a lot of the context that we were just talking about here, and just tries to very graciously just say, hey, you know, it's closing doesn't mean it's dead. This is where we're at with this right now. We don't think it's actionable. If you still want this, please feel free to comment here. We can reopen it if, you know, somebody's willing to put it in the effort here. Maybe
Well,
not those exact words.
I've started typing up something effectively to that effect, and then I'll take this one to close it. So yay, one less bug in our backlog.
Sounds good. Thank you, Tim.
Good
Thank
choice,
you, Bridget. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I didn't see that one. Mine stinks, I think. It's not great. I had one that I thought was fairly good a couple of weeks ago, right after the meeting, but then Antonio actually kind of started updating it, making sense of it. So
Which one?
I can't remember exactly which one it is now, but I picked a different one for today. I thought this was interesting. As a user, I want to be able to restrict IP families to some pods. It has last been updated last year, I think, but Lars just kind of kept it from going stale in December. And then Cal, you talked about it a little bit on September 26th. So I'm curious about talking about this one and figuring out what actions we can take to either move it forward or not.
This is the one that they want to create some pods with IPv4 only, some pods with dual stack, and some pods with IPv6 only.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the main problem is that Kubernetes doesn't have any control on the pods. It's the CNI only.
Right, but
Right.
Kubernetes could define a way to communicate from the pod API to the CNI plugin.
I mean, at least for some customers, we know of this as a valid use case to control their IP usage. For example, you have a lot more IPv6.
But you don't have any way. I think that was Lars who opened the first issue when that popped up, that there was CNIs that configured the pods with dual stack, and the API was showing the dual stack, but the cluster was single stack. And then we see visit in the kubelet. So the problem is, whatever the people configure in the CNI, Kubernetes is going to eat and show it. And you don't have any way of telling the CNI, just don't use these IPs or this family.
Right, but there could be a way to tell the CNI that.
So there is a capability that we do expose the IP ranges in the CNI that could be passed down via an annotation in the pod spec. I don't know if it's implemented in like containerd or more.
It's not part of the CRI. You'd have to define something new there.
Don't you risk getting problems with when things have been automatically mapped up to DNS? It's one thing to say I don't want to have an address assigned to me. It's another thing to say, well, an address was assigned to me, but I don't want to use it. See what I mean? You don't want to have any quad records or stuff like that in the DNS server for a pod or a service, and then there's no one answering.
But the use case here was to preserve IPv4 addresses, which might be a limited resource. Then the DNS thing falls aside. If you get an IPv4 address, you have used it. So
yeah, no, it's okay. So question is really, is the assignment of an address that you want to stop, or the use of the protocol? That's
The
fine.
assignment.
Yeah.
The assignment, because you might have like 256 IPv4 addresses in a 100 node cluster.
Yeah. But then, yes.
The thing is that we don't have this loop, but with multi-network we may have this loop.
Yeah.
I'm throwing that to the arena.
But I mean, in that, it's too bad, right? I mean, multi-network, yes, you're right, we could solve it because we could put information around the cluster network, the optional cluster network specification, right? Because we want to say in the attachment here, I don't want a v4 address. So that the rest of the functionality sees that these pods will not have v4.
So it kind of sounds like we're in a situation where we feel like we could do this. Our ideas about how to do it right now are a little, call it clunky, but we're not sure if we should. Is this a situation where we should at least ping the person, make sure they're still interested in this, and maybe try to just make sure they're still kind of, I mean, it's been a year. Check in, and if they're interested in this, get somebody to try to drive it forward.
There are certainly people who are interested in this, even if the original reporter of this bug isn't.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That
So
context
again,
would be good to add here.
we have never really established as a SIG what our protocol is for. Yes, we agree that this is probably a feature request that is reasonable, but nobody is actively working on it. Nobody will be working on it anytime soon. Do we keep it open in perpetuity because we agree with it in principle, or do we close it because nobody's working on it and it just adds noise? We've never decided on what our protocol is, neither as a project nor as a SIG.
I personally lean towards, if it's not actually going to be worked on, closed does not mean dead. Closed just means you can reopen it if you are the one who wants to like implement it, but we don't have any way to push this forward right now. We don't have anybody who's going to work on this.
And as long as we put a statement in the issue too, just to make sure that people know that we accept it as a valid issue, I think that's better.
Right. Yeah, some sort of message that says, hey, we're absolutely open to this, but at the moment there's no priority, so closed is not dead.
I struggle. I mean, if we have a way to designate that specifically, okay, like if you look at how many issues we have open versus how many issues we have closed, like as a project, when I go to an open source project and I want to file a bug or ask for a feature, I do search their open issues. I don't generally search their closed issues because it's going to turn up 10x as many things. And so is it really reasonable to expect somebody to go read all the closed issues to find one that was closed but not really closed?
I would have thought so, but I think you make a good point that that's not going to be the expectation for everybody.
I mean, unless we have a label specifically that says
that way.
We could have a label that's like, without prejudice, and people could reopen if they felt the need to. But we've also sort of shown that we don't have a lot of discipline when it comes to applying labels properly. So that's my biggest concern. So you'll find a lot of these issues, and I did like Bridget. I went back to the annals of history to look at the oldest issues. There's a lot of issues there that probably really just need to be closed, but were left open for this reason.
Right. Well, why don't I grab this one myself and kind of work with you and others, just kind of async, so we don't have to hold up the meeting for this, and see if we can come to kind of an idea there.
For what it's worth, I like this feature request. I agree with it. I just, if somebody were to bring a KEP, I would be happy to review the KEP and think about how to implement this. I don't know what all the details would look like yet.
There is a note from Calico, I believe, towards the end of the issue, saying that this is quite easy for us to implement. And I believe that might be the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it's just about API and how do we plumb the intention down from the user all the way to the network plugins, which involves crossing the CRI boundary, right?
Yeah, but I believe it can be temporarily solved with an annotation, like everything else.
Yeah, anything can be solved with an annotation.
Should we time box this now?
Yeah, that's why I was heading what I was saying. I'll
Okay.
kind of take this one async because we're going a little bit far on it. So
Yep.
thank you all. Let's move on to the next. I'll take care of that one. Oh, we got some more.
Well, I meant time box the backlog grooming.
Yeah, we should probably
Yeah.
move on to the next steps here.
Sure.
Okay,
And if
so
if we have time at the end, we can come back to this.
Yeah, otherwise we can flood it into the next one. All right, Dan, you want to talk about the work in progress NF tables kube proxy cap?
Yep, this is, so I had been avoiding pushing this cap for a while because it's not for 127 and it's not, totally ready yet, but things keep coming up where not talking about this sort of obscures details like in the kube proxy librarification proposal and stuff like that. So I just dumped this. I'm working on this in the background. People can read it and see why. There's a gigantic motivation section. And if people want to talk to me about it, they can. I didn't really intend to get into a discussion during the meeting, but.
Cool. So just a heads up, I'll subscribe.
How many caps do you have, Dan? I think that it's 3 or 4 or 5.
I'm not sure.
But a lot. That's good. That's good.
All righty. If nobody else has anything to say on that one, we'll move on.
Cool. I think that means it's me.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah. Topology is this big unanswered floating void where we've kind of gone in circles for a while now. I don't know that anything we say at today's meeting will solve it, but I wanted to provide some updates and open for a few minutes of discussion. I know we have at least one more thing on the agenda. Some thoughts I've had in the past week or so, as I've been thinking about hints, which is really the thing that I am most familiar with here, is that, if we ever make hints GA, which seems likely, that seems to be the trajectory it's on, it can't really, it probably shouldn't be something that is a conformance requirement. The more I've been thinking about hints, maybe it's a implementation detail and not a requirement per se. Maybe it's not the best way to communicate what a user wants to happen, but it's more a potential means to an end. One of the things I can't remember if it was Tim or Antonio mentioned this, but the idea that if hints existed, but there was a clearly better way to implement prefer zone, should we prevent that from happening? Like, should hints be a requirement, or should they be, as the name suggests, a hint? And if they are a hint and just a suggestion, then we need some other way of describing what GA means, because GA in that case does not mean conformance. It means, I don't know. So that's kind of my first thought here. I kind of want to back away from making hints itself a requirement. What I have in this KEP right now is kind of an older thing, which was actually going even further in hints, and it said, hey, anybody can publish hints, and because anybody can publish hints and create your own algorithm, we would actually start going the other way of requiring data planes to support hints. And the more I think about that, the more I think that's kind of backwards. Yeah, so these are just my thoughts. I think I'll try and update this PR and get some small additions into this specific cycle, but I think a lot more of the meaningful conversation has happened on Dan's CAP PR. Yet again, more Dan, more caps for Dan. But I don't know, that's my take on hints, is that hints could, maybe even at some point become an implementation detail of a policy. It could become let's just imagine that we have a prefer zone policy or something like that. Hints is one way to implement that desire, right? Somebody wants to prefer that their traffic stays in zone. Hints is one way you could accomplish that. I don't know, just some high level thoughts, but maybe if anyone else has ideas on what we can do to push this forward.
Okay. I mean, I personally will take a look at these. Does
So
anybody else have some time to jump in?
I mean, obviously, I've spent a bunch of time on this in the last week or two with KEPs and stuff. I largely agree with you, Rob. I think that hints are an implementation detail, at least as they're currently defined. They are an implementation detail. The way we've got it now is, traffic policy cluster means all of the cluster is eligible. It doesn't mean you have to spray to the cluster. It means the cluster is eligible. We haven't written docs that are clear enough, maybe. Then the implementation can choose to use topology or some other metric if it wants to figure out within the eligible pool of endpoints which ones to use. The question that I struggled with the most when we come to these prefer local things is, does it need to be a guarantee, or is it only that the current heuristics aren't good enough? And if they were more effective, if they were 98% effective, would they be good enough?
I think in terms of the heuristics being good enough, the thing that really hurts people is when topology aware hints suddenly says, oh, never mind, I'm not going to do it anymore.
Right. Well, and that's part of the efficacy of it. It's like we're hair triggered because we're unwilling to take a lot of risk by default. But if there was a more aggressive heuristic that got the users that are concerned with it with the prefer local today, if it got them to 98% in zone traffic, not 100, but 98 or 95, would they be okay with that? Or do they actually say, no, really, I really need 100% and I'm willing to take that extra risk, right? My big concern here is that we do the best thing we can by default as often as we can, so that users don't have to incur the risk of getting that extra 2 or 5 or 10% of effectiveness.
I think one of the things that I mostly agree with is the idea that hints are unpredictable, and that's frustrating. And even if we make them better, they, the more magic we make them, the less predictable they would become, even if we get to 97% or something like that. Whereas, I don't know. I get both sides. I get the other side that if we provide another traffic policy that is or something that just says route traffic to the same zone exclusively, then that is a scary tool, right? I get that, but so, it is predictable.
It's predictable, but I would like to make the idea of manually configuring your traffic policy so uninteresting that nobody wants to do it. And I think part of the problem here is we have historically conflated the implementation of Kubernetes, which is the endpoint controller, endpoint slice controller, and endpoint slice resources, and the kube proxy, with the API surface, which is service and endpoints and endpoint slice resources. Hypothetically, if we had said hints go in a endpoint hint slice instead of endpoint slice, and defined a new resource that was just for carrying the hints, and we said, this is not a conformance resource, this is an implementation specific resource, would it have changed people's perspective on what hints are about, right? If hypothetically you wanted to replace kube proxy and endpoint slice controller with a different discovery mechanism, right? That went off and did its own evaluation and had dynamic feedback loops that watching connections per second or bytes per second or whatever it would use to determine overload, and it was smarter than our current implementation is that acceptable, if it ignored our hints? And I feel like the answer has to be yes. Nobody's punching me yet.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. That's acceptable. I guess one of the things that I'm worried about is different, so topology spread constraints, right? From scheduling perspective, are decidedly more complicated than anything we've exposed that is similar on the networking side, right? And so at least from scheduling perspective, Kubernetes has said, hey, we'll let you be very specific. We will let anybody configure very fine-grained details. And from networking side, I think what we're saying is actually we don't want to provide that same level of granular configuration because we want things to be a little bit more automatic.
The sad truth of this project is because of the SIG structure and the enormity of the whole thing, different groups are making different decisions based on different criteria. Had anybody consulted me about that on the scheduling side, I might have had this same argument on scheduling. And like, is that an implementation detail or is it part of our API contract? Now that it's in the API, it makes it that much harder for anybody to implement a different scheduler.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I guess what I'm saying is if we had a naive topology approach from networking side, we could punt the problem and say, hey, it's a scheduling problem that you don't have enough pods in a specific zone, right? It's not our problem. We're just sending traffic to the pods you have in the zone. And yeah, but I know I time check and this is a complex one. We can follow up more.
Yeah. So the reality of this KEP, I mean, sort of, Dan, we've repurposed your KEP to discuss this. And even though I know you're not particularly interested in following through on it, that's where the discussion is. So we'll keep having it there. I'm really looking to first figure out what the right questions to ask are. And I've tried several times through this thread to ask specific questions that solicit answers that give us the insights that we're looking for. But also part of this is we don't have a wealth of users giving us feedback here. We've got a couple of people who are vocal about it, and at least one of them represents Gardner, which is a separate community of its own. I'm reluctant to make a final decision on this unless we've got some real user-facing input. So for those of you who act as front doors for other users, please, ask these questions and see if you can solicit more feedback so that we can, push ahead to figure out what we need to do here. It seems unlikely to me that this is going to make any progress on the 27 cycle, so I've bumped it down to the bottom of my review list for, today being PRR free.
Roger that. All right, continuing async. Last item on the agenda, Andrew, let's talk about the Kubernetes staging KEP.
Yeah, so this is kind of the evolution of stuff we've been talking about for a long time. Today or last night late, I added a whole history section so that we can kind of hopefully try to stop spinning our wheels. The history section's in a comment at the very bottom right now. I'm adding it to the KEP right now. It's long, but I think, I opened this KEP, which is really just mostly a copy and paste of a KEP we already had that Jay had opened, talking about the libraryification of Kaping. So Kaping went out, did an amazing job, amazing project. We got feedback from the SIG. They said, we like Kaping, but really we want it to be more like a library. There's more details on that in this history. So enter like where we are now, okay? We have agreement from the SIG that we want to make writing new backends easier in the future, and we need a way to move forward. But we don't know where that library should live. We don't know, we haven't decided yet, should the existing kube proxies backends use that library? And those two questions, I think, are kind of hanging us up and making us kind of go round and round. So like what I asked this group when you're reviewing this KEP, it's still early, it's up for change. We have a lot of great comments already. Like try and ask yourselves, for any future work around kubeproxy, new backends, Kapang, where do we want this to live? Do we want it to live in tree? And ask ourselves, like, what does it mean for the existing kubeproxies? Like, do we want the existing kubeproxies to use this new work, or is it a totally new thing? The existing kubeproxies are stable. They're going to live on like they are for a long, long time. And we're ready to break off and endorse a new thing. So that's kind of my quick 2 cents. Just shouting out more of you. I'll be working on this over the next couple of weeks. Just want to kind of tie up this whole thing with a bow and try to figure out the best way to move forward. So thanks.
First of all, I really do think that the spirit of Kapang is really important. I'm a little bit concerned about a future, like we've already gotten to a point where implementations are becoming disparate, not just from each other, but from Kubernetes. And I want to have that shared community built core that everybody's kind of at least using some of, right? Otherwise, I worry we get into a situation like Linux got into like 15 years ago, where like every distribution was so different, you couldn't really get things to work. And I don't want Kubernetes to end up anything like that. I lean towards the making it a separate thing, but including it in tree, like using it. I kind of lean towards that. But I'm also interested. Antonio's been the most vocal person, so go ahead, Antonio. You're muted, Antonio. I can't hear you.
There are a lot of the KEP has different. Every people has a different opinion and it's not cohesive. So some people want to use in tree to test. Other people want to have a shared library. Other people want to move kubeproxy out of tree. So I think that the first question is that we have to do is what we want to do. There are certain things that I don't have to create. So for example, is people want to write proxies. I was checking the Andrea code. Lars did a great job there looking for information. The Andrea code is just not doing a new proxy, it's vendoring a binary. Instead of using a daemon set, they just put everything and run it. I don't think that Cilium, OVN, Kubernetes, or another are going to write new proxies. So what is, I really think that we should ask the question is what really the people need? What is the people need? I think that what language you say at the end is maybe they want a library, but for what? Because moving kubeproxy to staging, what they are going to vendor all the IP tables thing that we have that is that they don't need that. They just can build the binary and run a daemon set. So I really think that we need to understand better what the people want, and once we have these requirements, we're able to solve or to provide a solution. But right now, I really don't understand, what is the real demand.
Okay, that's really good feedback. I'll try to clarify that. In my opinion, in like a one-liner, what the people want is the ability to easily write new proxies moving into the future with new technologies.
But that's the thing is, Gateway API has 19 vendors, and they don't have any need to write new process. That's why I'm challenging this. Is there are already proxies. This is a 7 years old technology. Services were there. It's really so hard to write the proxies that we need to write a library in tree for this.
Shane, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I hear what Antonio's saying, and I'm thinking, Andrew, shouldn't we be able to kind of go grab some people and pull them into the KEP and kind of say exactly what they're looking for? Like, we should be able to find some of the relevant implementers and stuff like that and get their input, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of that. Sorry, go ahead, Antonio.
No. The other thing is, you say people want to write proxies. So I went to the campaign project, and you have 5 proxies in 3 months. I mean, all the people here can write a proxy in a week. So that's the other question: is who is these people that is behind this demand?
So the issue that I have, the reason that I'm supportive of Kapang and these ideas is not that it's hard to write a proxy at any point in time, but the more proxies that are out there that are open coded, the harder it is for us to do anything around services and endpoints. Like, let's harken back to topology. If we decide we wanted to add a new traffic policy, all of those proxiers need to be updated. And we are now imposing work on these other teams who have other priorities and other things to focus on. And frankly, they're not always easy. Like, as many iterations of the endpoint selection code as we've had in Kube Proxy, they're going through the same issues around structuring. And so what I wanted to see was simply, that's not interesting code. Why don't we make it easy for them to consume code that we have tested and validated? And then they can do the part that's interesting to them, which is go program BPF, go program NF tables, go program vSwitch, go do something else with the information once we've already done the ugly, silly, not interesting parts.
Okay, and that's how the conversation ended in this CAP, with Dan said that is we need to do a library. Then we write a CAP explaining how is this library going to look like. You know, that's, and we discussed the technical things there. But the other, I mean, it's too vague.
The other part of this is that we're currently massively duplicating effort. Like, we have one team of people maintaining the in-tree proxies and the library code that they use, and then another team of people working on a completely separate code base with out-of-tree proxies. And wouldn't it be cool if we could just get them all working on the same code base?
Don't count on the teams that are doing the out of tree for Cilium and the out of tree for OVN, and the out of tree for Entria. Like, it's not 2 teams, it's actually like 6 teams that are doing largely the same work. And it's not the interesting work, right? Like, it is bringing no net value to the ecosystem to have this work repeated and repeated and repeated.
Yeah, but then which part do you want to share? Because those teams are never going. The people that use OpenFlow is not going to use eBPF. Is not going to use.
You asked this question, and I said it's, you know, the topology, the change management,
and that's why I say is, why don't we put that in the CAP and we do that instead of going rounds with different things. It's just define these interfaces and let's work on that. What's the problem in that? And we don't need to shuffle code around. It's just migrate. We are going.
Yeah, we are unfortunately out of time.
Sounds good. I will try to take this. The one thing we need to figure out is, does it go entry or does it not? Because in my opinion, like, that's why I did this staging thing. Antonio, I totally agree with you. Like, I would have liked to come in and write a new API spec and move forward. But if it lives in tree, we have to do it in these little bites, which is why I started with staging. I'm happy to do it in Coping even, you know?
Look, that's why I say is, if you write the interfaces and the API, it has to be in tree. And I say that I 100% agree with that. What I not 100% is that moving code around and then change everything, because that's, I mean, you have to backport something and that's a nightmare, and you have to retest everything and that's a nightmare. What I don't agree is just pull a whole project inside the project in one shot, because that's another nightmare. I mean, and it's
yeah,
I mean, it's
totally
not sustainable.
So
what I'm saying is, just define it. Okay.
Sorry, I want to wrap for time. I haven't read the entirety of this CAP here. I think the only real decision here is to staging or not to staging. Beyond that, I think everybody's agreeing that having a library of some sort is useful, whether we seed it from the existing code or whether we design it from scratch. The CAP doesn't need to cover the design of the library. It needs to cover the mechanics of how we're going to use it and publish it.
Yep.
Sounds good. I'll try to
Thank
take
you,
this
everyone.
and redo it in the CAP. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, we might want to bring this one up again next time, Andrew. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. See you next time.
Hey, for backlog grooming, should we do it again? Everybody try to find 1 or 2. I went back to the oldest ones, and I've already closed 3 or 4 this morning. So
cool. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.